Welcome to Ravens Across the Pond, your place for everything Baltimore Ravens. From a fresh, European perspective. Plenty of laughs, plenty of piss-taking, and of course, questionable insights. Sit back, relax, grab a beer, and enjoy the show.
Welcome back, Ravens flock, to another episode of Ravens Across the Pond, another live episode. Nathan joins me once again on a Thursday night over here in the UK, and you'll see he's back once again. We love having this guy on. Every time we ask him to come on, he never says no. Kevin Oestreicher, thank you very much for joining us. How are you?
I'm good. I'm glad to be back. And I think, a lot of good changes happened over the last handful of months here for the Ravens. So I'm definitely really excited for I wish the season could start tomorrow, or I guess on Sunday. But I guess we'll have to wait a little long. We still got a lot of workouts and offseason program stuff to go. But it's been a really positive offseason, I think, for the Ravens so far.
Yeah, I think it's fair to say this has probably been one of your busiest off seasons covering the Ravens.
Yeah, starting off with the Harbaugh coaching change, and obviously the Crosby deal that wasn't a deal, and then the free agency into the draft. It's definitely been more active than usual, but I think, again, it's all a good thing, especially considering the changes that I think the Ravens needed to make and the things they needed to do. They've hit on a lot of those for me, so it's been busy, but it's been really good. I've really enjoyed it.
Yeah, excellent. Before we get on to some of the main talking points, obviously the NFL draft on April 23rd. Everybody knew what the Ravens' needs were going into that draft. We've had this conversation the last two nights with Ken McCusick and Cordell Woodland, just trying to gauge what everybody's opinion is on. So I'll ask the same question to you, Kev. How would you grade the Ravens draft, and was there any surprise? Were you surprised that they went two wide receivers, in the draft? Were you, surprised that they didn't get a sense of the EDC had been obviously, so vocal about? He was vocal that there was two centers on the board. Obviously, one of them goes to the Bears. How would you grade it? And, what's your, other than obviously the first pick, what was your favorite pick of the draft from a Ravens standpoint?
Yeah, overall, I gave them in the A- to B+ range. I think it was a really good draft for them. There were some picks that I think they could have maybe waited for a couple of them, but overall, I really liked all the players that they got. In terms of two wide receivers, I guess a little surprised, but not totally. I knew there was a possibility it could happen. It essentially just would come down to me, and I was talking about this before the draft. It was, how much do they trust their youth, or how much do they want to trust their youth? Because now with essentially 6 wide receiver spots filled up with the 2 rookie wideouts, you're probably not bringing back DeAndre Hopkins. Same thing in the tight end room. When you draft 2 tight ends, you already have Andrews and Durham Smythe. You're not going to probably bring in a guy like David Njoku, for example. So honestly, what I think it was with the 2 wide receivers is I think that's how they plan to replace Isaiah Likely in the offense, because I don't think a Hibner or a Cuevas, despite the fact that I think that they can be good in multiple different areas, you can use them in a lot of different ways. I don't think you fully replace the Likely skill set in your tight end room. I think you're doing that a little bit with a guy like Jacoby Lane and Elijah Surratt, who both obviously are big-bodied wide receivers, can go up, get the football. That's where I think that comes in. And I think when you look at how the offense is probably going to be structured here, you're going to see more wide receiver sets. Not that they're going to go away completely from the heavy tight end stuff and the heavy personnel, but we're probably going to see more play action and stuff along those lines. And Lamar hasn't had, a big-bodied wide receiver that he can just throw that ball up to and trust the guy will come down with it really ever in his career with the Ravens. So the fact they went out there and got 2 of them, I liked that. I think that there were probably a couple of wide receivers I would have taken over Jacoby Lane at 80, and Surratt was actually one of them. But, you flip-flop the 2, right? I think that Surratt was a 3rd-round value. Lane was a 4th-round value. You switch the values around, and you're like, right, you get both of them. You got them both. So at the end of the day, I think Chris Bell was really intriguing to me at 80. Same thing with Brazel as well. But, the Ravens had a specific skill set in mind. And, everything you hear about Jacoby Lane is extremely positive. Someone who is going to come in, work hard, and, already has the backing of multiple former Ravens, including Todd Heap and Des Bryant. So, that obviously speaks for something. 11 picks probably is still too many for me. I think that's where I dock them a little bit. I don't think that 11 draft picks are going to make the roster, especially because I do expect them to make one or two more veteran moves. And then obviously we know the undrafted rookie free agent thing that they always do, where they'll keep a couple of them, I think. So I'm not sure that Evan Bernstein is going to make this roster or something along those lines. And I feel like he could have maybe gotten. It's not about the player itself. It's about essentially wasting assets, where you did that last year with Garrett Dellinger. And, because that was a 7th-round pick, but, you could maybe have used that to move up and get someone or get capital in 2027. But overall, I think it was really good. You addressed your biggest needs, which was obviously in the trenches, offensive line, defensive line. And usually these draft classes are kind of skewed that way anyway in terms of grades. Picks and everything else, kind of a cherry on top. When it comes down to it and say, okay, hey, you added this and that in the later rounds, but taking Ioane and taking Zion Young really beefs up where we all thought, I think, the Ravens needed to beef up.
Yeah, a lot of people have said that the Ioane pick allowed the draft to open up for the Ravens and go down different routes, and it became quite a quintessential Ravens draft in getting a kind of a project edge guy, drafting 2 tight ends in the same draft. It was almost like the Ravens were playing off the hits from the past again. Given with Jesse Minter now coming in, and there were kind of talks earlier on in the process the Ravens might be getting a bit more aggressive in the draft. Obviously, we saw with Crosby that they were happy to spend picks. Were you surprised there wasn't a bit more moving around, kind of up and down, or just maybe being a bit more aggressive? Or are you happy that the Ravens kind of stuck to what they know best? And
yeah, I was a little surprised, although I think I say this every year. I think I've said it honestly the past 3 or 4 years, because they've had so many picks in these drafts. And I'm like, there's no way they take all these guys. They're going to move. And then they just don't. And I'm like, well, I feel like I should stop fooling myself. This is what they're going to take all their picks. The Hibner trade up, I thought they could have moved off one of their picks from this year instead of the, 2027 6th or something or whatever it was. So I think that there could have been more movement for them, but I also think the board fell in a way that was okay for them. Obviously I think the center position is the one that everyone's looking at right now. And I think there probably maybe would have been a move, kind of heard hints at it from Eric DeCosta, that if a guy like Logan Jones or Jake Slaughter was still available, they would have felt comfortable moving up from 80 to take that guy. They didn't obviously want to take them at 45 because that was where Zion Young was taken. But if those guys had slipped maybe into the start of the 3rd round, I think the hints that we've gotten from Eric DeCosta was that, yeah, maybe we could have seen a move up there, and that could have involved some of those later picks. And I think that would have been smart for them. But I mean, clearly they didn't like anybody else in the class outside of those 2. And that's kind of the messaging we've gotten. So, that kind of leaves a big hole in your offensive line, considering you just don't really know where that position is going to land by the time the season starts right now. But I mean, the good news about that is that you have a lot of time from today until the start of the season. So whether that is a trade, whether that is a guy that gets cut attention, maybe they have an inkling maybe of, okay, we're monitoring these couple of guys because, hey, the Bears took a center in the 2nd round. Maybe that means Garrett Bradbury is available. The Bengals took 2 guys that can play center. Maybe that means Ted Karras is expendable. So, all those different things factor into it. But in terms of movement, I would have liked to see them move a little bit more around, especially up, or just move back and get the draft capital. Usually it's about a round buffer if you trade back into 2027 from a specific round. I think they could have done that with their last pick, where maybe you trade that 7th and, the last one, and you get a 6th in 2027. But, I'm not complaining too much, especially because, like Rayshon Benny is someone I had as like a late 5th round grade, and they get him in the 7th. Like, I think there was value for them in those later rounds, but I don't think they're going to have 11 draft picks makes the roster. So if that does happen, I'm going to be like, come on, you could have made the move, but it is what it is.
Yeah. Kevin, as it stands now, obviously, you've mentioned there the question around centre. Do you believe that they will make a move to bring a centre in, or can you see a centre coming from within the roster currently as it stands. And if you believe that there is, who do you think is going to play center from this roster?
Yeah, I feel like the Ravens do have confidence in who's on their roster, but DeCosta's made it pretty clear they're going to keep looking at options. So if they do bring in someone, obviously the competition as it stands so far, I mean, Corey Bullock is in there, Danny Pinter, Devon Gwen, and obviously Nick Dawkins, who was the undrafted free agent out of Penn State. I'd be curious to see, because I think Bullock showed a lot of potential, but there is inexperience there despite this being his third season, just around the team and in the NFL. Pinter really hasn't had like a ton of high level starting experience over the course of his career. So that's kind of a question mark to me. Dawkins is really intriguing, especially because he played next to Ioane at Penn State. So there's already, I guess, a little bit of chemistry there between those two. And Gwen, I don't really know too much about in terms of center. I know he came over with Ledford from Atlanta, but we'll kind of have to see with that. I would prefer them bring in somebody else. I mean, the difference this year, though, compared to what it was last year at guard, is at least there's a competition, right? Last year at the guard spots, there just wasn't. They handed the jobs to Falele and Voorhees without any competition and said, here you go. This is what it is. And at least this year at center, you have multiple guys that are going into this, assuming they don't bring in anybody, and you're gonna have those guys compete for it. So that is a plus and a positive in itself. The problem, though, of bringing somebody in is right now there really aren't a ton of options. Graham Glasgow is probably the best one right now, but Ethan Posich is out there who's recovering from a serious injury he suffered last season. Bring back Sam Mustipher, which doesn't really excite me all that much. I mean, James Daniels is another guy who's a do-it-all offensive lineman. Maybe bring him in for versatility. So I think that someone would have to become available, because you don't just want to sign someone to sign someone. Glasgow would make sense to me, and I'd like that move, but he'd really be the only one. Other than that, I'm probably looking at the trade market. I'm looking at guys that get cut. But the problem is, you don't want to wait too long for this. Like, you can't wait until final cut down day to bring in your starting center. It's far too long away in the process. You have to have a guy in, I think, before or right at the beginning of training camp to get chemistry down with everybody, because I do think that's important. So I wouldn't be shocked if they just rock with what they have, because I just don't feel like there's enough available out there right now outside of Glasgow. But maybe they're already kind of trying to figure out and are working the phones in terms of a veteran center that they can maybe pry loose from somebody.
So we just touched on Nick Dawkins there, and I think we just talked about while we were doing the draft about how the Ravens bring in kind of a large quantity of undrafted free agents to kind of have a look at. Out of the cohort who's come in so far, I guess, A, who are you most intrigued by, and B, if you had to kind of make a claim for one of them to be on the starting roster right now, based on whether it's need or just intrigue or talent or position, who would you go for?
This is undrafted free agents?
Yeah.
Wait, Dawkins is obviously the one that everybody's talking about right now. There are a few, though, that intrigue me. Aaron Graves out of Iowa, the defensive lineman, he's really intriguing to me. Now, the thing with the D-line is that they are so deep at defensive line right now that I'm just not sure there's going to be an opportunity for him. But he was one of the guys that when I draft was over, I'm like, right, who's available and undrafted for agency? He was one of those guys that I thought, hey, maybe the Ravens could spend a flyer on him. Like, if it wasn't Benny, I thought that they could have maybe taken him. He's someone that really intrigues me. I think he could be a high-level practice squad player. There's not enough room for all the guys on the D-line right now who you want to make the roster. Like, you're going to have to cut probably one or two really good players there. So I don't think there's a lot of room for him on there. Obviously, the big story and the feel-good one is Ladarius Webb Jr., who, again, didn't earn his spot just based off of his dad, who obviously we know was a great Raven and one of the legends, I think, of this organization. And, injuries kind of robbed him of what I think he could have been at his peak. But he's someone as a defensive back. The Ravens do have an opening at that fourth safety spot. They lost two safeties with Darius Washington and Alohi Gilman. They only brought in Jalen Hawkins. So, I think with Darius Webb Jr., he could be a player that surprises people, because, again, I do think there's like this unfair narrative around him, like, oh, it's because his dad. And that's not it. Like, he's talented in his own right. And I think that he could be really intriguing as well. I think Dawkins out of everybody probably has the best chance to make the roster, just because of that's your one big need that you do have. And I think that he was a guy that I would have taken a flyer on in the 7th round if it wasn't a Bernstein. But I think that those two guys are pretty intriguing to me overall. I mean, if you want to talk about the quarterbacks there, in the third quarterback spot. If they do end up keeping one on the roster, I think they're only going to keep two, but obviously Diego Pavia and Joe Fagnano were the guys that are the undrafted players there. I like Pavia, I think, more than some people do. Obviously, as Jesse Minter stated, some experiences that he's had to learn from a little bit over the course of his college career. But the big thing is obviously the height. And I get it. Like, there are clear disadvantages when, you're shorter, especially at that position. But if you can play, you can play. And you don't just, stumble into second in the Heisman voting. You have to do something to get there. And so I think that with his mobile ability as well, I wouldn't be shocked if he makes the practice squad. Maybe they do put a guy like Skylar Thompson on there as well. But in terms of like actual roster chances, I think it'd probably be Dawkins and Ladarius Webb Jr., but Graves and Pavia also intrigue me.
Yeah, just touching on obviously taking running back Adam Randall in the fifth. Obviously, that was a well documented. It was a Steve Biscotti pick. We've mentioned Jacoby Lane, Elijah Sherritt, which of the coaching assistants. So obviously Eddie Faulkner, running backs coach, Gary Colbert, wide receivers coach. Which one of those assistants do you think it has got more of the work cut out with? Obviously those guys that we've mentioned there. And I saw the clip of Adam Randall on Brian's show earlier. Talking about Derek Henry, a walk-in Hall of Famer right now as it is, and if he can take something from to learn from him, it's going to help him greatly. But just how big of an effect are these coaches going to have on these rookies coming in? And as I say, do you think it's kind of more got the work cut out with them?
Yeah, I think the assistant coaches are going to have a really big, vital role in the development of these guys. And, I think it's really cool because even just before the draft, we saw Dwayne Ledford at the Penn State Pro Day working with Vengi Owane, and that relationship has kind of already been there so far. So I think that's really cool. In terms of a coach that, probably needs to, I guess, has their work most cut out for them in terms of development, I'd probably say Gary Colbert, just because of the fact that I think there is so much untapped potential with both Lane and Surratt. Or I think Surratt's further along, like obviously the production in Indiana, like, and even at JMU, like, he's been there. And Lane, he had a 12 touchdown season in 2024. So like, it's not like he's any stranger to, putting up big numbers, but I think the untapped potential with Jacoby Lane is just like, it is so prevalent to me. And so while there are still things that he needs to work on, and, I'm not sure what his role is going to be in year one, could just like, he's an immediate red zone threat, and same thing with Surratt as well. They just haven't had that guy on the roster. So being able to work with him, working on, just perfecting the contested catch, separation, like all that. Lane is also really good at drawing pass interference. He might be the new Torrey Smith over here in Baltimore and how many pass interferences he can draw on a weekly basis. But again, I just think it's in terms of actual snaps that are available, it's a two-way street, because I think they're going to be more snaps overall for the wide receivers, more targets overall, and more balanced offense in that regard there with Declan Doyle. But at the same time, we know Zay's going to get his targets. Bateman, I think, is in for an uptick in targets as well. Tez is obviously the guy that everyone's looking at for wide receiver 3 right now and expecting to have like the breakout season. So where does that leave guys like Surratt and Lane and even LeJontay Wester, who I think is even just kind of being lost in the shuffle in terms of this? I mean, I think that it's going to take a little bit of work for them to get there. Maybe it does take someone going down for a little bit, knock on wood, obviously it does not happen. You never want injuries, but like at the same time, I do think that there are probably going to be limited snaps there. So it's just going to be a matter of like keeping those guys engaged over the course of the season, continuing to work with them so that when their number is called over the course of the year, because they definitely will be called, like that number will be called at some point, just having them ready, working with them throughout the season. And then, you get to next season, the year after that, you continue to build off of that. I think it's going to be exciting. But I mean, I think that overall, just talking about the head guy, I mean, Jesse Minter is a talent elevator all the way around. We saw that with his defenses, especially in Los Angeles. And I think that rubs off on a lot of different guys here. He has a clear plan. The coaches have bought into that. The players have bought into that. So I think it's just overall a very well-oiled machine right now in Baltimore, where I think everybody's on the same page, which is really refreshing.
First listener question of the day, Kev. So Posh plays. This is Phil. He's a big college football fan, supports Alabama. He was surprised to see we didn't take inside linebacker on day 3. A little surprising as well that we didn't address it at all kind of throughout the draft. What do you make of the current inside linebacker depth?
Yeah, I'm definitely with you. I thought they would have taken a flyer, Kyle Lewis was a guy out of Pittsburgh that I thought he ended up going. I forget where he actually went in the draft, but he was a pretty late riser or consistent riser over the course of the draft process. I mean, you do have a couple of guys that you signed and undrafted free agency that could maybe be there right now. The depth is, I mean, you're going to be relying on, I guess, bounce backs and potential, which is kind of risky in its own right. I mean, obviously, I have confidence that Jesse Minter can bring the best out of Roquan, and that's kind of I mean, if Roquan isn't doing well, I mean, your position's kind of scuffed there anyway. So I think Roquan is the big key to start. But then obviously, I think the recovery for Teddy Buchanan, because I think out of all the rookies, like Teddy Buchanan came on, at the end there before he got injured and really started to come into his own. So depending on where he is in his recovery and how that looks, for every player that comes off a serious injury, it takes a different amount of time in terms of how much time it takes to trust themselves again, to, burst off that leg and whatnot. So maybe for Buchanan, boom, he gets it right away. It's a non-issue. Maybe it takes, I mean, we saw it with Keaton Mitchell, I think is the biggest example of this, where like he came back from his injury, took him a little bit of time to kind of get acclimated, get back into it. We kind of saw that. But then this past season, we're like, oh, there he is. There's that Keaton Mitchell that we all know. So to me, I think that that's a little bit of like uncertainty there. I think the biggest X factor in that room, though, is Trenton Simpson. I mean, really hasn't been able to put it together for a full season here over the course of his Ravens tenure, contract year for him. So, I'm sure he's going to be extra motivated this time around. Jay Higgins showed a lot as well. But yeah, that's one. That and safety are two positions where I thought they could have added a depth piece on day 3. I definitely am a little nervous about it. I think that obviously center is your big glaring need, but then I think adding one inside linebacker and one safety, those are probably your two lesser needs that I'd still add a guy at. So yeah, I thought, again, you have 11 picks, 8 on day 3. I think they could have used one of them there, but I guess they just didn't like the value.
Yeah, actually, leads into a question I was going to ask about positional groups in general. I think we know which groups you're probably not so high on right now. After free agency and maybe even after the draft, is there a positional group that you're now kind of feeling the opposite about? Maybe you're feeling a bit more optimistic, or you're feeling that they can really kick on and do some really good things next year?
Yeah, I really love the front on the defense line and the edge guys. I think they addressed it and attacked it aggressively this offseason. And, even though some of the moves didn't work out the way that they wanted them to, you still had, I think, a really solid offseason, because we knew that this defense last year just could not consistently get to the quarterback. It was honestly embarrassing kind of how we would have to talk about Nnamdi Madubuike being the team's sack leader, and he's only played 2 games. We're in like week 11. We're just like, what are we doing here? So they finally, I think, both on the interior and on the edge, have just given themselves optionality and even more versatility. You have guys that excel against the run on the edge, like Tavius Robinson and Zion Young. You have Trey Hendrickson, you can put out there in a pass rush situation. He's going to get to the quarterback. You have guys who can do both with Mike Green, who I expect to have a huge year or two under Jesse Minter and Anthony Weaver. And then on the interior, obviously, the question mark is Nnamdi Madubuike. Again, the reports have been positive. The workout videos have been positive. We haven't heard anything official yet, but, just assuming he's back, just for the sake of, what we're talking about here. If you have Nnamdi Madubuike, Travis Jones, and he has Peebles, who I expect to have a huge year, Calais Campbell, who is still playing at such a high level. And then you have other guys like, what's going to happen with Project Washington? I don't see a place for him on the roster right now. John Jenkins played really well for the Ravens last season in his spot. I think that, and they re-signed him during the year. So I think that tells you how much they think of him. And then you also have really intriguing potential guys like CJ Okoye and Rayshon Benny as well. So I think that it's always good to have this problem. It's always good to have a positional group where you're like, man, we have so many good players here. We're not going to be able to keep all these guys. Because I'd rather have that than you're like 3 deep at a spot and you're like, well, we don't have any tough decisions, but we also don't have enough guys we want to play because just don't have the depth there. So I really like what they've done at both of those places. And I even think that, if they want to put like the pure cherry on top, like round out the roster, let's go. Obviously center is the one, but it depends on their trust level in Adisa Isaac. If they want to bring Jadeveon Clowney back, I'm not going to say no. I mean, if you just want to get all the optionality you can, another guy, and people compare Zion Young a little bit to Jadeveon Clowney, so who better to learn from in that regard? He's said that he's open to a reunion and he'd be cool. So that's another one that I'm kind of keeping my eye out there for. But honestly, I talked about this on Locked On Ravens for this morning, but if the season started today, I'd feel pretty good about the roster overall. I think they've addressed a lot over the course of free agency in the draft here. There are a couple needs that you can, make an argument they need to add one more guy at, which is true. But especially like what they've done on the defensive line, I think that they'd be ready to go if the season started on Sunday.
Yeah, two of the players you've mentioned there, obviously rookies last year, Mike Green, Malachi Starks at safety. I look at a player like Mike Green, obviously should have been a first round pick. We know what went on and why he slid to the second. Thankfully, he slid to the Ravens. I find it staggering that last year he played 686 snaps. It was the third of the Ravens, front seven behind Roquan Smith and Travis Jones. And I just, do you envisage now that Mike Green, drops back into like that kind of that third down guy, where I feel he'd be so much more comfortable last year playing too many first down snaps. I don't think stopping the run game is particularly a speciality of his. I think he's more suited to being that third down guy. Obviously, we understand why he's probably played so many snaps. And in regards to Malachi Starks, obviously, this is a guy that is just so athletic. You can see that he clearly cares about his game. He played at an elite level in the SEC at Georgia. And, that's a college program that just keeps, the conveyor belt of high impact defenders just carries on coming. We saw the wonders that Jesse Minter worked in the Chargers secondary. And these two guys that we are going to see the best of this year, as I say, and obviously, Mike Green, becoming that third down guy.
Yeah, I really think so. And I think part of the stuff when I talked about optionality and versatility on that front, it does take a lot of pressure off of Mike Green, where I still think you can play Mike Green on first downs, but he was tasked with a lot of it last year, like you said. And, I think that now with a Hendrickson coming in and being able to be opposite of him on third down, obviously on first down, you can throw a Zion Young out there to set the edge physically. I think it takes pressure off of him. And I think that's a good thing where, again, you can use these guys strategically, deploy them strategically. And I do really think that Mike Green is going to have a great year too. And a part of that is just like Jesse Minter has saved guys' careers. He has put non-household names on the map. He has gotten the best out of later round rookies and draft picks. Like all of that is something to me that points in a positive direction for it. Yeah, not just Mike Green, but obviously Malachi as well, where we know the range Malachi has playing in that single high role. You can put Kyle Hamilton up, and even with Jalen Hawkins, like you can move all these guys around and play all different roles with these guys. So I think that, last year rookie wise was pretty inconsistent overall. I think we saw flashes from a lot of them, but at the same time, it wasn't quite what I expected. This year, I'm expecting, the rookie class from 2026, like, you're going to have a lot of high instant impact guys from that already. But I'm almost kind of putting it as, hey, you're going to have two rookie classes this year because you get the guys from 2026, but then also the 2025 guys that didn't really get to show their stuff. Like, I don't know why Aeneas Peebles wasn't playing as much because he showed the flashes on the field during the season, but, John Harbaugh just didn't want to put him out there on that field. Maybe Remy Jones does win a job somewhere or somehow. I don't really see how right now because you didn't pay John Simpson $30 million to sit on the bench, in my opinion. And obviously Ioane is going to win a job as well. So unless he somehow comes out in training camp and starts playing center, I'm not really sure about that right now. But you know what? As a swing guy to have, I like Emory Jones there as well. I think there's a lot of potential within that draft class from last year. We just didn't really get to see it because the year was just so weird. So I'm really excited for those year two breakouts. I really think there are multiple coming.
Just one final point, specifically those two that you're Malachi Starks, Mike Green. We all know the issues last year around the defense, and obviously what Malachi Starks had to deal with, new starters coming in and trades in the middle of the season, adjusting to Hamilton's role late on, and the amount of snaps that Mike Green played, the positions that Zach Orr and John Harbaugh were putting these players in. As I say, not to dwell too much on the past, that's gone. Would I be being too harsh and saying that there was some form of coaching malpractice there?
No, I mean I don't think that's harsh. I think that just the way that we saw some of the players get lined up on defense and all that stuff. And again, the players aren't going to ever say stuff like that usually, unless it's like really bad and they're just done. I don't think the Ravens ever like the Ravens. They liked Zach Gore. Like you could tell, like they liked him, and they didn't have any like things where they just didn't want to play for him, or like they didn't want to be around him, you know, because sometimes with coaches it can get that way where just things get really tense between the players and the coaches. Like I genuinely think the players had a good relationship with Zach Gore, and we heard that in the answers, right, where the players would always take accountability. And you heard Kyle Hamilton, Marlon Humphrey, like a lot of guys say, you know, the coaches aren't out there on the field. You know, they're not dropping interceptions, blowing coverages, this, that, and the other. But at the same time, it's just like, I mean, I can point to many different things throughout the season of like you're playing off coverage, like every single play, even on like 3rd and shorts, you're playing 5-10 yards off the line of scrimmage on these guys, allowing slant routes to happen there, you know, weird timely blitzes and stuff along those lines. And it was abysmal, especially early in the season. The stats themselves, like full year, are actually not as bad as it was because they were able to kind of get it going a little bit later towards the end of the season. But obviously it's just, you know, too little too late, I guess, at that point. But I think with a guy like Jesse Minter in, who obviously his specialty is defense, Anthony Weaver coming back and being able to work with him, you have guys, assistant coaches along that as well. Plus, I think just bringing back a Calais Campbell and getting his leadership back in the building, just having that there. The thing with Zach Gore was just the inexperience. I mean, it was where he had never called plays ever before. Like that was the problem. And, you know, with Mike McDonald, he at least went to Michigan for the season. He called plays there. You know, he was able to do that and then come back to Baltimore and be the Ravens DC for 2 years. Minter, Vanderbilt, Michigan, LA. Like, you know, you have that experience. It's just tough, right? And so the Ravens took a risk there with Orr. It obviously didn't work out. I guess you're kind of going through that same thing again with Declan Doyle on offense, but it's a little different because I think that, you know, he's worked with Sean Payton in New Orleans and in Denver, and, you know, he's had that experience. But he wasn't like, it was Ben Johnson's offense, obviously, in Chicago, but like, I do think that with that experience, it's just a little bit different there. So again, like I thought Zach Gore had a ton of potential, and I just think he wasn't ready yet. Not to say he can't be a great play caller in the future, but I just think that he wasn't ready in this particular moment in time. But I think for Jesse Minter and this coaching staff, despite some of the inexperiences in some places, I think they've supplemented it really well with both assistant coaches that are either from the college ranks or maybe a little bit new to the NFL, or guys who have been around for a while. You have both, like, you know, Joe Lombardi, obviously Weaver with his experience, bringing in a couple of other guys as well. So I think that it's exciting, this coaching staff, because I think it's so well balanced.
And do you think Minter and Weaver are good enough to extract another year or two out of Marlon? Or do you think this is Marlon's last year as a Baltimore Raven?
I mean, sorry, Kevin. I mean, to be fair, Marlon Humphrey was one that we discussed last night. Ken was really big on just how much Marlon needs to improve this year. But another one as well, just to hop on Nathan's question, Roquan Smith, in a high likelihood, this is kind of a last ride for Roquan in Baltimore, with obviously the salary implications in 2027. So we're just hopping on the back of that, just this season, Roquan and Marlon Humphrey, you know, just how big is it for them this year?
It's huge. It's huge. You know, I think that obviously they could have cut both this offseason. I'm completely fine with giving them a year to see what it is. And if it's working, that's great. You know, that's the ideal scenario. But if it doesn't, you know, you can get off of both guys. We'll get even more cap savings next year. And, you know, I feel like for Marlon, you got to just use him in different ways. I mean, obviously he's not the outside guy. You have Wiggins and Awuzie to do that. You kind of move him around and everything. But, you know, we saw missed tackles. We saw blown coverages, all that type of stuff for Marlon. So, again, like, I think Jesse Minter can put these guys in the best spots. Now, he, again, yes, is not out there with Marlon doing that on the field with him during game days. That ultimately is going to be up to both Marlon and Roquan to see what they can do from a physical standpoint and perspective. And, you know, those guys are not necessarily super young anymore. I mean, they're not old, but they're also not young. So I do have confidence in that. Like, it's the same thing with Bateman too, where yes, Bateman had a bad year this past year. It was just not great, but at the same time, like I want to give him a year on the Declan Doyle offense and see, because I think the talent and potential is still there with all three of these guys. We've seen them do it. And so while for Roquan and Marlon, they might not be like in their prime anymore. And I think that, if anything, they're just exiting it. I still think that I want to see what they have. And, if it doesn't work, I think, inside linebacker is a little more iffy with the depth in itself. But at least at corner, I think that you can put a guy like TJ Tampa out there. Obviously, you can move Kyle Hamilton to big nickel as well, which they like to do. So I'm envisioning a bounce back season. Does that mean they're going to be like all pros again? I don't know about that. But like if they're just better than they were last season, it raises the floor and the ceiling of the defense by so much.
Yeah, for sure. Talking about cap, we've got another question from Phil, who talks about Zay Flowers and the 5th-year option. Obviously, the Ravens are very well known at keeping negotiations, quite on the down low. We're probably not going to hear a lot about it unless it's going terribly wrong, like the Linderbaum contract last year, where it got so out of hand that someone had to finally talk about it. Do you think this is something we might see before the season, or do you think it's something that they might just hold off until the next season now? I would have asked the same question about Lamar, but I'm now pretty set that Lamar's going to wait until everyone else get theirs done next season. So I don't think anyone's expecting a Lamar one this season, but do we get Zay done before the first game?
If I had to predict, I would say yes. Of course, that doesn't mean it's actually going to happen because like we mentioned, we don't really know what goes on with these Ravens negotiations, but I think that they do want to make it a priority. Obviously with the 5th-year option stuff, that was a no-brainer decision. Zay earned that. And even though it's a lot of money, like he's a wide receiver one to me. He's worth it. They've never paid a receiver as much as they're going to have to pay Zay, assuming that they keep him in the fold. But this wouldn't even be a conversation if Greg Roman was still this team's offensive coordinator. They wouldn't have paid him. I mean, I'm sure they didn't want to pay Marquise Brown. They traded him away. Marquise didn't even want to be in Baltimore anyway. So like, that is what it is. Like, I highly doubt they would have paid Marquise Brown what he was eventually going to want, assuming his trajectory continued what it was going to be in Baltimore. Even with Harbaugh and Monken, I would have been like a little curious about how they would have approached it. But I do think that that's a priority within this Declan Doyle offense, with the offense we are going to see, having a receiver like Zay. And Zay has proven it. Obviously, he's somebody that is extremely hard to cover. And while he's not, the DK Metcalf build or the AJ Brown build in terms of wide receiver, that's not what makes a wide receiver one to me. It's a guy that can consistently get open, there for the quarterback, puts up numbers. And he was the entire passing offense for the Ravens last season. Like you look at the target numbers for Baltimore last year, especially wide receiver wise, and no one even came close to Zay in most, if not all categories. So, I mean, look, you're going to have to probably pay him over $30 million, maybe 30, 35, depending. I'm curious to see if they want to get it done before any Puka extension. Obviously, JSN already got his in Seattle. I don't think he's going to be up at, I think he's the next tier down in terms of contracts. But even if, Puka beats JSN in terms of money, that raises all the other like secondary markets floors and all the other markets floors in itself. So I think the sooner the better for Zay. I'm not sure. I think Zay's value is very high right now. And I think it might be smart for him to get it done just for long-term security. I'm not sure how much he can earn next year. If the salary cap goes up again, yes, there is that in there, but I think that Baltimore does want to make it a priority. And, I think that they will get it done. Again, I don't know. That's just my hope. But if it doesn't get done, I don't think there's any chance that he does leave Baltimore. I mean, I'd be pretty floored at that. Now, I guess I said that with Linderbaum, and here we are. But I think for Zay, it's a little bit different because that center contract was nuts, what the Raiders paid him. So, whatever the Ravens would pay Zay will be more in line with wide receiver contracts, whereas Linderbaum's center contract, I feel like, might be an outlier for a few years in terms of what centers actually get paid.
Sorry, Nathan, just before you jump in there, just on the Zay Flowers potential extension, just looking at possibly some of the figures and projections, if you were to kind of put a stake in the ground, Kevin, I'm putting you on the spot here. If you look in between 30 and 35 million APY, where would you put your stake?
Depending on how long you wait, I might go like 33. Somewhere along those lines. If he waits longer and he has another great season and the cap goes up, I'd put them probably right at the edge of 35. I think obviously there's risk for everything here, right? Where if Zay does wait and he wants to say, all right, I'm going to play out this year, I think we're going to have another great year, first year decade loyal offense. He could have another great season, but he could also get injured. And then that obviously puts the value down. So, it's risk and reward for both the player and the organization, because again, maybe the Ravens are like, hey, we think your value is really high right now. We want to get this done before your value gets even high. So again, it's kind of like a tug of war between the player and the organization in terms of kind of when the timing of this happens. I think that's what we're kind of looking at with Lamar right now, with kind of the timing of everything. But if it were to happen now, I'd probably put him more up around 33. If Puka's extension happens, I'd probably put him more up around 34. And if he waits another season and is able to get through it healthy and has another great year, I'd probably say 35.
Yeah, sounds about right. I think I was just about to laugh about how the 1 year of Linderbaum's contract gets you 4 years of Ioane. So it's, just shows how silly some free agency contracts can be.
Yeah.
Kevin, obviously we're wary of time and we appreciate you coming on. Just before we wrap up, we've just got a couple of questions that we've been sent in via WhatsApp, if that's okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
So Henrietta asks, after seeing the drafts, Kevin, and moves from our in-division rivals, it's still early, but who do we see as our biggest threat? And how much would that change if the Steelers and Browns have a stable QB situation? I know it's only May, but it's the only thing I can think of.
No, that's actually a really good question. I've actually been thinking about this for a while, and I've gone back and forth on it. And I actually like the clarification about the quarterbacks in there as well, because right now I feel so weird saying it, but I think Cincinnati's the biggest threat to Baltimore right now, because I think Pittsburgh's defense regressed too much last season. And I just think they hired Mike Tomlin again. Like, I don't think the change in itself from Tomlin to McCarthy is going to be that big of a difference for them. I think it's just more of the same. Whereas for the Ravens, I think going from Harbaugh to Minter was like, there's very much like a difference there. Like McCarthy, it's kind of the same thing, where I think they're still going to have like a pretty high floor, but what is their actual ceiling? I think with Cincinnati, they've needed to invest in their defense, and they did that. So I'm going to give them credit for it, where they did get Dexter Lawrence. They got Brian Cook and Boye Mafe, and took Cassius Howell in the second round. So with that, and look, I mean, the Bengals were putting up 50 points last year and losing. Like that's how bad their defense was. So, and that was with Joe Flacco. So I'm just like, if they can get their defense just a little better, they're going to put themselves in a much better position here. Now, is that enough to take the Ravens out for me? Because I think the Ravens are the division winners in my eyes this season. So I think, is that enough to take the Ravens out? Probably not. We do know the Ravens have struggled with the Cincy offense at times during the course of this, but it's new era in Baltimore. I just think with Pittsburgh, I actually liked a lot of their offseason moves, but I mean, if it's Aaron Rodgers again, which obviously that's what all signs are pointing to, it's another year older for Aaron Rodgers, and I just don't know. Where I like their wide receivers better this year, because last year it was just kind of DK Metcalf and friends. This year you do have Pittman, you got Jeremy Bernard as well. So like, I'd like that for them, but the defense just wasn't good last year. And while they tried to make some more additions there, I just don't know, because that was the Pittsburgh thing, where even when they were going through like Duck Hodges, Mason Rudolph, like all that, the defense sometimes would put up all their points and they would win games. Like that's how good the defense was. But we saw last season, like it just wasn't as good last year. And so there's a chance it gets better. But at the same time, I just think that Cincinnati has a better chance of keeping up with the Ravens. Whereas I just don't think Pittsburgh does. Where if we know the Ravens, they can get in that mode where they'll just put up like 30 points in 3 quarters. Cincy at least has a chance to keep up with that. I don't think Pittsburgh does. So especially with the added stuff on defense, like Cleveland, I think that I'd like their draft a lot. They haven't really done a ton this offseason in free agency outside of adding offensive linemen. But again, the quarterback position to me, whether it's Watson or Sanders, just doesn't really move me a lot. I think they still need to figure that out. So I'd probably say Cincinnati right now, but I don't think that any of those teams are going to, be the division winners. I think to me, that's still Baltimore.
Pittsburgh's addiction to mediocrity continues to baffle me. Do you think they're more likely to go 8 or 9 or 9 and 8?
I think they'd be happy with either, considering.
Yeah,
it is crazy.
I said just before you came, in the studio before we went on, Kevin, me and Nathan were having this conversation, about the Steelers, and I just look at some of the decisions and choices they have made over the last couple of years. Drafts, some of the free agent signings. I just look at like Kenny Pickett, Mason Rudolph, George Pickens, obviously, and then moving off from. Understand why they probably moved off from Pickens, obviously, but then Aaron Rodgers, and they're going to be paying him around about $15 million this year.
Yeah,
and I just think just commit to being. I think sometimes it's better to just be bad than it is to just be mediocre and just look. You got to just face it. You're going to be bad for 2-3 years, but you need. I don't think. I just don't think they're committed to what they need to do and just rebuild from the ground up. But yeah, that's another.
Yeah,
probably for another pod.
I would have loved for them to get Kyler, like for their sake. Kyler's not like the best quarterback in the NFL, but I think he's better than what Aaron Rodgers would have given you, and I think he would have given you a chance to at least be more competitive than they would have been, with anybody else or Rodgers. But obviously Minnesota took that route. I don't really know. Everyone's going to talk about the McCarthy-Rodgers storyline, but I mean, yeah, I think they would have been much bigger threats to the Ravens if they had just done that. But you know what? I mean, as a Ravens guy, I'll take it. I mean, if you want to throw Aaron Rodgers out there again, it's fine with me. Like, you can go do that.
Absolutely. Chris Andrade, our Brazilian friend, who I believe will be going to watch the Ravens-Cowboys game at the start of the year, asks who will be next into the Ravens Ring of Honor, and what are your thoughts on John Harbaugh if and when he eventually makes it in?
For Harbaugh, I mean, I think you have to. I mean, I don't see again the thing with Harbaugh, which for a lot of people, it's honestly pretty unfortunate. Just me thinking about it is like, this is a what have you done for me lately? Just industry in terms of sports, right? Where when something happens and it's great, and then it kind of years go by and stuff doesn't go as well. You remember the stuff that happens most recently, and so. The way that Harbaugh's tenure ended in Baltimore, I do think is pretty unfortunate, because he did so much for the organization. And like, I don't want to take away from that. Yes, at the end, it wasn't good enough, and we all know that. But, he was able, especially early in his career, to, bring the Ravens to the AFC Championship with him as a rookie head coach, and, Joe Flacco as a rookie quarterback, and obviously winning the Super Bowl. So, no one's going to sit here and say that, Harbaugh was great at the end for Baltimore. It unraveled at the end. But, it's very rare that a coach gets 18 years with one team. It's very rare that, they have the consistent success, even just in the regular season. I know playoff-wise, at the end, it wasn't great as well. But Harbaugh definitely deserves to be in there once it's all said. So maybe it is him. I don't know how long he's going to coach with the Giants. I mean, again, he's a competitor. He wants to coach. So maybe it, takes a little longer for him to actually get in there. I don't know. Maybe it would be him. I'm trying to think of anybody else that could go in. I don't know right now. I feel like Harbaugh might be unless I'm just forgetting someone egregious, which then is my bad. But I feel like Harbaugh, at least from a coaching perspective, he should be in there.
Yeah. One last one, because I'm wary of time. So obviously, listeners, viewers, all the questions you've sent in, we've tried to get through them all. If we haven't, we'll try and get you next week. We'll get them out. From Lee in Belfast, how will head coach Minter and offensive coordinator Doyle go about getting this offense going in the right direction?
I think it just starts with being unpredictable. And that's something that Eric DeCosta talked a lot about. I believe he talked about this on WBAL, where you're going to have multiple different looks. And I think, this even dates back to Greg Roman's offense, where I remember, I think Lamar Jackson went on an interview and said, like, they know what we're calling at the line. He was just like very upset about it. And I'm just like, okay, well, you can't have that, right? So obviously it was better with Monken, but it just felt like with Monken, he either forgot Derrick Henry was on his football team, like once a game, which was just not great, or you just got really predictable where it's like, okay, it's 1st and 10. Here comes the Derrick Henry run, and everybody comes up to the line, and it's like a 2-yard loss. So I think within that, and again, DeCosta kind of talked about it with the fullback, you kind of know what's coming, right? When Ricard's on the football field, to some level of an extent, unless you're throwing Ricard out there in the flat on a play action, like what's coming there. I think tight ends allow you, if you have multiple tight ends, no fullback, you have 3 receivers on the field, whatever you want to do, it makes you a lot more unpredictable. So I think that's first and foremost, just making sure that teams do not know what's coming, because I think there's been too much of that, and it just has gotten way too predictable. And use your guys in the right scenarios, because at the end of the day, like, you have a lot of talent on this offense. You have a lot of guys that can do a lot of different things, but your stars are going to be what carries you. You're going to have unsung heroes that pop up and make big plays and timely plays and all that. But on a 4th and 1, I want Derrick Henry on the football field. We don't need Justice Hill on the football field on the 4th and 1. No disrespect to Justice Hill, but like the gravity that Lamar Jackson and Derrick Henry carry, and we see it. You can turn on film of a 4th and 1 or a 3rd and short play, and there's a read option or a play action, and you just see like 3 guys go with Derrick Henry or 3 guys go with Lamar, because they demand that attention. It takes away like a third of the defense almost sometimes by just having them on the field together. So I think starting that off, working the play action game is going to be really, really important this season. I've said this for the last handful of years, and Declan Doyle's offense, I think, is going to be able to do that a lot better here. But if you're gashing a team on the ground, let's say first opening drive, Derrick Henry has 10 carries for 60 yards and a touchdown. He just like go down the field and just run the ball down their throat. If you start doing play action, you've already gotten gashed on the ground as a defense. So you're going to have to, linebackers, safeties, everyone's going to have to take a step up to honor the fact that we have to get ahead of this thing. We have to just stop them right now. Then you can have a guy like Andrews or Hibner or one of your receivers just sneak through the middle of that defense, because all those guys are taking a step up and they're already on a disadvantage doing that. So using play action, I think, especially early in the season, is going to be really, really important for them.
Absolutely. And another new thing coming this season are the new jerseys, of course.
Yeah.
I think they're amazing, but I think some people have always hesitant to change. Now, what it does mean is that I'll be replacing the 2 behind me with 3 beautiful new ones, and I love getting my value for money. So the 3 names that I can get on the back who we think are going to be kicking around for long enough, I'm thinking Lamar and Hamilton. Yeah. You got an idea for a 3rd?
Ooh, I might go Zay. I might go Zay. I mean, I'd love a Henry one, but I don't think that's long term, right? So I feel like Zay. Maybe wait until the extension, because again, if I had said Linderbaum, we would have been in a bad spot right now. So I think my bet's on Zay. I think Zay. I'm trying to think anybody else on defense. I don't know, because Zay, the number's already 4. Because you also have to worry, because with the numbers, like if you got a LeJounte 83 jersey, you're like, oh well, he's just 10 now. So you got to kind of wonder. So I think my pick would be Zay.
Yeah, I think I'm with you on those ones. I think a nice white flowers one just feels like it works for some reason.
Yeah, I love it.
Kevin, thank you very much for your time.
Absolutely.
We love having you on. The WhatsApp chat has been popping off of everybody raving about having you on the show.
That's awesome.
I think it's fair to say you're a firm favourite over here in the UK with Ravens fans. Just a reminder for our new listeners and subscribers, where can they find you, Kevin?
Yeah, absolutely. You can find me over on Locked On Ravens. We're a 5-day-a-week plus more daily Ravens podcast. So Monday through Friday, we have you covered twice per day with 2 shows, 6 a.m. and 6 p.m. Eastern time. Plus, we have bonus episodes on the weekends when there are headlines. We do instant reactions after big breaking news, and after Ravens games, we actually do watch-alongs. So during the season, we will have watch-alongs for the games, and you can see the joy or the misery that the Ravens will bring each and every single week live in action. And then a lot of other stuff as well that we have over there. So you can find me on Locked On Ravens, both in video form and audio form. If you want to watch on YouTube, you can like and subscribe over there, or wherever you get your podcasts, we're in audio form as well. So same show, both audio and video. Plus, you can find me over on social media at Chaos Record 34 on Twitter, Instagram, trying to get TikTok going. So in any platform, you can find me over there at Chaos Record 34.
Yeah, excellent. Listeners, make sure you go over and give Kevin a follow. I love listening to his stuff. I know everyone in our community loves listening to his stuff. Yeah. Once again, Kevin, thank you for joining us. Hopefully we'll speak to you after OTAs and all that. I know you'll be pretty busy. Hopefully by then as well. The O's are still in the season. I know we spoke about them off air. Another late night here in the UK watching the last game.
Yeah.
Down in the 3:05. But yeah, Kevin, thank you very much. All that's left for me to say is that we've been Ravens Across the Pond. They've been Nathan, Kevin Oestreicher, our star guest, and we'll see you on the next one. Bye now.
Till next time.
Thanks for listening to Ravens Across the Pond. We'll see you next time.